Hey everybody, and welcome to my Karthus guide to the mid lane. A little bit about my experience with Karthus. I have about 300,000 champion mastery points on him. I play him in D4 and D5 elos. He's one of my absolute favorite champions thematically, and just kind of what he does and his playstyle is just so much fun. Especially, I love things like Zombie Karthus and Tank Karthus is also pretty fun, but it does screw a little bit with the win ratios. But Tank Karthus, I think, can be effective, but that'll be a video for another time. This is actually a part 2. I made a kind of a basic guide for Karthus already that goes over kind of just runes, masteries, and items, stuff like that. Just like really basic stuff. I'll put a link in the description below for that as well. So I'm gonna do some timestamps as well. I have a couple different sections, one being laning, one being power spikes, one being matchups, and my favorite tips and tricks. So you can just kind of skip around and just go to the places that interest you the most. If you already have a pretty solid laning phase and just want to hear what I have to say about certain matchups or certain power spikes, just feel free. I kind of want to offer something to my subscribers. It's been really cool talking to you all. If you want me to review your NAOPGG, or if you want to link a full gameplay down in the comments, I will be more than happy to take a look at them. This is actually what I want to do. Like, as a profession, I want to be a coach, like maybe for more traditional sports, definitely not league, and then also be a teacher as well. So I really get a kick out of doing that kind of stuff. So please don't feel remiss by doing any of that kind of stuff. All right, and let's move on right into the guide. Alright, let's jump right into Karthus' lane. First up, his gank assist is very strong. He provides a lot of damage in the all-ins, and he has a very good slow that is pretty easy to hit on opponents. He is also extremely strong in the 2v2, especially when when someone is trying to counter gank and they go on you first, and you're able to pump out a lot of damage with your passive. So you should be generally winning, I don't know, about 80% of the 2v2s just based off of the power of your passive if you are being focused first, just kind of depending on the strength of the two junglers and their dueling potential. Alright, and on to Karthus' roaming potential. He is very good at roaming due to his immense amount of wave control he gets with his Q. He's able to push people in very effectively, and he's able to roam and provide a lot of damage on those roams and the slow. So he's able to do this starting at, I would say, level 3. If it's completely pushed in and say their bot lane is pushed in, you can definitely look for the roam, especially after the Karthus buffs to the Q. You're able to pump out a lot of damage, especially against the underleveled bot lane, or if you're looking to roam top generally. There's going to be a bit more CC for you up there if you are looking to roam. So definitely look. I know it can sometimes be tempting to just kind of just sit in lane and farm up, but you really should look into pushing people in that don't have great wave clear, and taking advantage of that by punishing their bot lane or their top lane. All right, and some of the strengths we have with Karthus is he has just a huge amount of damage potential. He's a very strong dueling, in my opinion. He has very good range in lane. It's very easy to CS with him in lane as well. You just need to get used to CSing with just the edges of your Qs, so you're not hitting multiple and you're getting that isolation damage on the CS. Another strength Karthus has in lane is just obviously his global ability with his ult and being able to support lanes. He's just a really strong pick in the current meta, where we're seeing a lot of control mages in the mid lane and a few assassins, but it's not really that rough for Karthus, because he generally will outscale, I would say, 95% of his matchups. I mean, there's just a really few amount of champions that will outscale Karthus in the late game. Some weaknesses with Karthus are that he's very skill shot dependent in the early game. If you're not hitting your Qs, you're really not going to have any pressure in lane. He is very squishy and susceptible to all ends, especially if you misuse your W. And say you are looking for an all-in, you use your W, they still have a mobility spell. If it's an assassin or some kind of hybrid like Ari, they can look to all-in you. And you don't really have any recourse outside of your damage, so you need to be very careful. It's a very kind of feast or famine playstyle with Karthus, where you're either dominating them or you're just going to get pretty much destroyed. So you just be very careful with the all-ins. And I'd say another weakness, especially with certain builds, you can really struggle in the early game, especially if you're doing the Rod of Ages into the tier. You have an early game power trough that can really, it's not really that good in this meta because it's very quick games, and you want to be able to impact the map as quickly as possible. So if you see your opponents kind of steamrolling the game, you might want to look into more damage-oriented options and less scaling. Alright, and going over some of the kill pressure Karthus has, he has kill pressure starting at level 1. It's just all coming down to your skill shots. You should be playing him. If you feel like you're just flat out better, you should be trying to push your advantage as much as possible. You should be just pushing them off as much CS as possible, and really looking for those all-ins, because people really underestimate Karthus' damage because there isn't really that much, they don't really have that much game knowledge against Karthus due to his lower pick rate. Alright, and on to the last one, his wave management, which is one of probably the most underestimated parts of Karthus' kit, is ability to just spam Q and push in waves extremely quickly, especially after you get a mana item. You don't really have to worry about mana issues. If it is turning out to just being just a farm fest where you're not really able to land any Qs, they're staying at max distance, sometimes it's good to just max to not go all the way into your Q. And what this will do, leveling up wise, is the mana restore you'll get from your E will actually outvalue the mana you're spending on your Q. So sometimes if you're just sensing that this lane is going to be a bore, you can just spam push them in with a lower rank Q, because you're getting a lot of mana back as opposed to the mana you're spending on the CSing. Alright, and that will wrap up Karthus' laning phase. Alright, let's get right into Karthus' power spikes. First up, his level 1 is one of the strongest in the game, doing around 90 damage on isolated targets, and being able to just be spammed out with that super low cooldown. So this is a really good time to harass out your enemy laner and look at where you can, how they're kind of dodging you, what their CS, kind of their patterns are, how they're CSing, if they're just running up last hitting with abilities, and what kind of range they're looking at, and just really trying to build up your advantage. Just starting at the first minute of the game, you should be pressing them with your strong point at level 1. Alright, and another really strong power spike for Karthus, in my opinion, is his level 2, where he gets his Q and his E. It's just it's a large amount of consistent damage. The E does drain your mana pretty quickly, but it does do a good chunk of damage in those lower level exchanges, especially if they're on top of you and they're just kind of running around trying to dodge your Qs, but they're staying in your E field. You can really chunk them out of lane pretty quickly, and then kind of get your mana back just by your E sustain. Alright, one of the most obvious power spikes for Karthus is definitely his level 6. One of the biggest parts about all meta mid laners, I would say Karthus is kind of on the fringe of being meta, but what makes him really good is just his global and his ult, and the ability to affect the bot lane, which is really big in this meta. Just having a very good ADC that needs to do well in the early game and scale up as much as possible to make his team fights a little bit better. Alright, another pretty big power spike for Karthus is when he completes his first mana item. Whether you're going Ludens to kind of help you with that early game trough in power, or if you're going more of a scaling build, this first mana item usually allows you to just be spamming out your abilities in team fights, because you have a pretty large mana pool, and just really start controlling the team fights with your just your insane amount of damage right now that Karthus has after the Q buffs, and also he has really good base damages in my opinion. Another pretty strong power spike that you should look to take advantage of is his spell pen. If you're snowballing and you get the spell pen boots and say they have a lot of healing on their team, say maybe a Warwick jungle, a Vladimir in the mid lane, and a Soraka in support, you can really go with that Oblivion Orb. It can be very effective into Morellos, and if you get those double spell pen items on top of a level 11 alt, you're just doing a massive amount of damage in the mid game. You can really look for a lot of all-in kills where you're just kind of chasing people down with your QW combo. Another pretty big power spike with Karthus, in my opinion, is when he is kind of just a team fight monster. If you're against a lot of tanks, I really recommend going these two items. Obviously, you need a mana item, but this would be a little bit later in the game. With Rylaiza and Leandries is able to give you a huge amount of tank shred and allow you to peel for your squishies, your ADC in the backline as well with that slow. So this is a great power spike. This is all about team fighting. This is just providing constant slows on their divers and their tanks, and it makes your passive just so much more effective and stronger. So really look to get good passive usage with those two items. All right, and the other two super obvious power spikes is his level 11 when he ranks up his alt, and then just kind of pretty much when the game's over is, in my opinion, you just win so much after getting that level 16 alt, unless they have a lot of prevention, such as tanky team members, Zhonya's, Locket's abilities that make them go invulnerable to counter that level 16. But yeah, that will do it for Karthus' power spikes. All right, let's get into some of the matchups for Karthus. First up, let's start with some of the easier matchups you should look to take Karthus into. First up is Galio. Karthus has a 57% win rate against him, and it is a very easy laning phase just because he has limited wave clear. He's a melee champion, so you can harass with Q. You're able to really just kind of farm your advantage and just have more of an effect in team fights later than him. You really, he helps you get to the mid and late game because he doesn't have too much kill pressure on you unless you really don't know his kit and you're getting hit by his E all-ins with his WQ, which he does have a bit of kill pressure, especially with Ignite. You just really can't walk straight up to him and get stunned, so just be careful of that. And it's a pretty easy matchup. You're able to harass him off a lot of CS, and yeah, just definitely look to take Karthus into Galio. Another easier matchup is the Orianna with 55% win rate against her. She's one of those champions that isn't really too strong in the early game. She is super strong team fighting in the late game, don't get me wrong, but she is pretty weak, and you are actually able to get to pressure her with your kind of sustained damage, as she does have a bit of a cooldown on her Q and W, while your Q doesn't have a cooldown. So if she is queuing minions to CS, definitely look to take advantage of her by going in with your Qs when she has her abilities down, and just out-trade her and chunk her out of lane. All right, another one of the easier matchups is Kassadin. You have 55% win rate against him. You're a lot easier to execute in team fights than he is. You're able to push him under tower due to his weak wave clear. He also is very weak in the earlier game, and it really is a good matchup because he allows you to scale up. He just allows you to basically free farm a wave. He does have a little bit of kill pressure with his jungler ganking you, and he is level 6. Be really careful where you ult and when you ult, because he can stop your channel with his Q. But otherwise, this should be a pretty easy matchup. He doesn't really have too much kill pressure on you, and whenever if he looks to Q harass you, just after he does his one ability, just try and run him down by spamming Qs at him and make him pay for trying to harass you when you are going to definitely out harass him. All right, and some of the tougher matchups you're going to see in the mid lane is Anivia first up. She's a pretty rough matchup for a lot of people in this current meta because she is really strong. Current win rate against her is 49%. She controls a really large range, and you don't really have the mobility to get past her wall. I recommend the way I play against Anivia is I play very aggressive with my poke, and I whenever she tries to wall me off and then the alt Q and make you run around a wall combo, if I have a similar amount of health to them and she just used all of her abilities there, I really look to go in the all in because her auto attacks are super weak. She's very slow and susceptible to getting hit by your Qs, and her damage output is super low with the shorter cooldown ability that she can get a couple off in a team fight is her E, and it's a very low amount of damage, especially in the early game, especially when you're not slowed by her alt or Q. So really look to punish her around her cooldowns. Another one of the tougher matchups is Vlad. You are able to harass him pretty well in lane, but he can kind of counter your kit. Most Vladimirs build Zhonya's, and they also have pools, so they're able to he's able to dodge your ult. He does have a good amount of all-in kill potential, especially if he's running Ignite and just flash igniting, ulting, and you're kind of susceptible in the earlier game before you have any HP. So this can be a little bit of a rougher matchup, but you just really need to learn his zone of control versus your zone of control. And just when he's doing those flash engages, just try and save your flash for them. And you currently have 49% win rate. So it's still a decent win rate, but Vladimir can snowball against you if you are not careful and misuse your cooldowns. All right, and another champion that Karthus seems to struggle a lot against is Swain, currently a 48% win rate against Swain. Karthus is pretty squishy and vulnerable to CC, and Swain brings a good amount with his passive and E. He is a bit tankier, and he also builds Zhonya as well, kind of a reoccurring theme across these tougher matchups. He is able to kind of dodge your ult, and he's also really tanky, so he is pretty easy to control in team fights, though, with your W wall and your ability to kind of harass him out of lane. So, yeah, this is a little bit of a tougher matchup for Karthus. If you have any tips or tricks for these matchups, please let me know in the comments down below, and that will wrap up Karthus's matchups. All right, and let's jump right into some of the tips and tricks that I've found playing Karthus up to the diamond level that I've been playing him. First up, very easy way to land your Q when you're getting chased down by ADCs is to just throw out your W and be buffering your Q right after you finish your W cast, or you can either buffer your Q or just throw out your Q and then place the W to get the slow to ensure that they can't just run past your lay waste. And on to the second one. Karthus can do a bunch of different things with his build, and it should be really tailored to what your team needs. If your team has a lot of damage but has very little CC and control, really recommend going Rylai's. If you just have a bunch of tanks, you should really be going as much damage as possible, in my opinion. The next tip I have is you really need to develop a feel for when you need to go extremely offensive and flash in on squishies to get an amazing placement on your passive, and when you just really need to be throwing out your Qs from max distance and trying to have as much uptime in the team fight as possible, not really going towards that zombie playstyle that can sometimes be more effective, but sometimes it's more called for to play that defensive style. I can't really tell you what setups to do it. You just really need to put as many games as possible and try out both sides of it and see when it works and see when it doesn't really work. Alright, and on to another tip that I've found with Karthus. He just works so well with Liandry's, in my opinion, especially just compounding that 10% more damage you get on top of the last stand 10% you get, on top of the level 16 ult that Karthus does. It just does insane damage late game, so it doesn't really have to be a first, second, or third item, but if you're filling out your build, it can really just have such an impact with that 10% damage late game, and it's just a really great item to pick up. It synergizes well with his E, and if you're not building Liandry's, I definitely recommend you take a second look at it. Alright, and another thing I found, dodging, how enemies kind of dodge during your passive. As a general rule of thumb, if people are higher health, they don't really care getting hit by Qs. But the lower health they are, the more they're going to look to dodge and kind of run an unexpected way on your spell cast. So if they're just running away with full health, you could just get off a couple free Qs, usually, in my opinion. But if they are low health, they're rarely going to run in a straight line, so always be cognizant of that and try and throw out your Qs in unexpected ways as well. Alright, another important tip in team fighting with Karthus is try and force out as many defensives as you can with your before you die with your passive form and go in for an ult, because it can really make an impact if you're able to force out a Zhonya's, or if you're able to force out a Vladimir pool, or if you're able to force out a Locket from the support, or a big cooldown from the support that would otherwise save the ADC. So really look into forcing that out before you fall into that passive. Alright, and one of the bigger things in lane that I've found is that you really need to look into the spacing and sphere of influence you have with your Q, as you do have a really decent range. So you really need to control it with your W and with your EQ, and just kind of learn where say you're going against a Xerath, he's going to have an extremely large sphere of influence. He can poke you out from where you can't really poke him out, but you can take advantage of the fact that he's slowed when he's doing his Q channel, so you can look to cross over into his sphere of influence and throw a Q down on him and make it a good trade. Alright, another really big part of Karthus that I think is pretty good right now is that he hasn't played that much. He's starting to get a little bit more play than when he did, but people don't have as much knowledge of his power spikes and how much damage he's going to be doing at a certain part, as opposed to something like a Talon or a Zed or a Fizz, where it's really obvious how much damage he's going to be doing, or a Vel'Koz, and when the damage is coming. Karthus is very good for just kind of sneaking out kills where they're like, holy shit, that ult did so much, or holy shit, that Q did so much, I had no idea. Alright, another tip is tanky enemy team comps and prolonged fights, you really need to have a little bit of a bigger monopool. It can help to, if they're running 3 tanks, you might want to look into, maybe a second mana item. Sometimes you can get away with that Rod of Ages, Seraph's build, if it's kind of a slow going game where no one's really snowballing, so look into that kind of playstyle where you have enough defensiveness to not really die to those diving tanks, and to really punish them with just being able to keep your E up on them and shredding them down. One thing if you can take away from my guide is the importance of your W is so big in team fights. It is just, you really want to be hitting multiple targets with it, and you really want to have it on priority targets. I know that's pretty obvious, but I've played with so many Karthus that just they just waste their W. They're not placing it correctly. They're just using it to start fights. They're just slowing down one tank to do a little bit of peeling. You really need to be getting multiple people with your W, especially late game when it's so big and easy to hit a bunch of people with it. You need to be using it at just the most opportune moment when they are they've already used most of their mobility, and you're just really crippling them with that slow and magic resist shred. Alright, and that will wrap up the tips and tricks for Karthus. If you have any, please comment down below. I love to talk Karthus. He's one of my favorite mid champs, and yeah, it'd be great. Alright, and that will wrap up tips and tricks. Alright, and that is the end of my guide for Karthus. If you have any feedback or critique, I'd love to hear it. Just comment down below. It's been really cool talking to you guys, so just make sure if you have any questions for me at all, I will definitely get around to them and answer any kind of questions, no matter how specific or weird, like, hey, I really like Electrocute Karthus, is this what you should be running? Or hey, I really like Airy Karthus, or hey, I have this weird Predator build that I like running out of the jungle. You can definitely just kind of pick my brain in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the content, please remember to like and subscribe. Just kind of do educational, informative content. And yeah, and as always, guys, just take it easy.